So, welcome to the A&A podcast where we discuss topics of interest to our audience. We are your hosts.
I am Antonio.
I am Alexander. And today we want to welcome a very, very special guest for us that he's going to participate with us.
That's right.
She's a native San Antonian.
And among many other things, she is a professor at Oblate School of Theology, doctor of ministry, catechist, published author, artist, award-winning poet, and a spiritual director.
So welcome Dr. Bonnie Abadi.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. This is my first podcast.
Oh my gosh, we are so glad to.
We are very happy that you are here with us today.
So today we are discussing another topic from another of our followers, and we found these questions in our chat. So that's why we brought this topic today. Antonio, can you share something more about this topic, please?
Absolutely. The topic that we're going to be discussing today is conscience and discernment. Two very important things that we don't always think about, but they're always very present in our lives.
Yes, you're right. I think when the people hear this word conscience, they will have many concepts, and we will try to give some insights about that.
Right. So I think we could start by trying to set a definition of what conscience is. And so according to the dictionary, conscience is a sense or consciousness of the moral goodness or blameworthiness of one's own conduct, intentions, or characters, together with a feeling of obligation to do the right or to be good. It's also described as a faculty power or principle enjoying good acts, or as the part of the superego in psychoanalysis that transmits commands and admonitions to the ego. But I think these definitions, though they're good, they're kind of very general and technical and academic. And I think that if we ask the average person, probably everybody would have a definition or an understanding of what conscience means, don't you think?
Yes, especially inside different traditions that we have. I will just share one that is a manualistic tradition. Even they propose that the conscience is a capacity, is a faculty. But for me, it sounds a little pragmatic because it means that we have the possibility to use reason in moral reflection. And of course, we know that conscience is more about that. So maybe let us, our guest, to give us, what do you think, Bonnie, about conscience?
If you were to ask the average person to define conscience, I think a popular image that people refer to is that of Jiminy Cricket from Pinocchio, the little cricket that sits on the shoulder telling you right from wrong. But it's a cute image, but it really is, if I were to look at what the role of conscience has been in my own life, it's a recognition that we are innately connected with God, and so our conscience is a primordial presence of God in our lives. It's planted in us, that original goodness that God created us to be. And so the conscience is that guide toward God. Our orientation is toward God. And so when we are in touch with our conscience, we're in touch with that primordial voice of God that's present in us.
You chose many words that in one of our documents of the church, one of the Pope put or built these concepts. And I'm sure that Antonio wants to share something about this concept because this will show up a very beautiful image that how the church understands the conscience.
Yes, the document that we're referring to is Gaudium et Spes, and in it says, among many other words, that conscience is the most secret core and sanctuary of a man. There he is alone with God, whose voice echoes in the depths. So I think what we can get from this is that the conscience could be for us a place of encounter also with God. That it seems that whether people are religious or not religious, there's always this idea that there's something, a little voice, as you were saying, or an angel and a devil on either shoulder that guide us in a different way. But how do we develop this? Because I think that if we just consider the conscience from this perspective, we could fall into the idea that, or we could recognize that some people may consider something to be good based on their conscience, and then other things to be bad. And for the next person, it could be something completely bad that one person considers good, right? So, obviously there are different things that shape our conscience, right?
Yes. Many authors mention that just our culture, our sexuality, our relationship with the people will shape our conscience. But let me go even deeply in this image or this concept that the church have, using an image that most of us Catholics we know very well, and is a sanctuary. They say that our conscience is our sanctuary in ourselves. And there are two meanings. First of all, that like any sanctuary that maybe we went one day, is a holy place. And for us, our conscience is holy because it's, like Antonio just said, is a place where we meet with God. And of course, I have to say that each of us have a different image of God, but for sure we will have a very general meaning of Him. And the second meaning is that inside the sanctuary we have a certain kind of autonomy. That's mean we have to use our freedom when we use our conscience, because if we are maybe for somebody, or maybe for some idea of the society, of our culture, of our background, it will be difficult to make a decision. Yes. Especially in this war that we will see, many people struggle trying to make good actions.
Yes, and can I just maybe add on that, and we can discuss on this, because one of the things that you were adding as we were talking about what shapes our conscience, you talked about culture, you talked about sexuality, but even I think culture can be so broad and at the same time so specific to each individual, that when we say that culture shapes our conscience, we could be referring to the culture of our country, could be the culture of a state. Like in Texas, people have a very different culture than people in the north, for example. We could be talking about the culture of a city, or even neighborhoods or families. All of these places have a different culture. And though they're influenced by a bigger culture, they're different. I mean, you could talk to people from the same neighborhood, neighbors, and they have different customs. They have, even if it's slight different, there is a difference between one family and another, even siblings, right? And so, even in terms of gender or age, right? How do you think, Dr. Bunny, that as we shape our culture, what could be some of the differences that you see in people, in the development of people, especially people that grow up in a similar context?
That's a really interesting question, because I think about the core where our consciences are formed, and that would be in the family. And as you mentioned, among siblings, we all turn out differently, even though we have the same parents with the same core values. So it seems to me that there's freedom from the beginning to choose what will work for one person as their guide through life. But I think generally you have the basic concept, and you move forward with what you need for your life. Now, that's not to say that morality is subjective, right? Because there are things that are right and there are things that are wrong. And I think that was one of the things that Pope Benedict XVI was very strongly against, the subjectivity that we brought to morality. And he said that we all tend to be moral subjectivists, but there is objective morality that covers what is right and what is wrong without our buying into it as individuals. But I think also the concept of free will comes to play here. Yes. And so it's our ability to listen or to ignore that voice within us, the teachings that we received from our families, the shaping that we got from our culture. Because culture has really good things, but it also has some dangerous things. And so to be able to look into, but also beyond.
Yeah, this is what one of the authors that we were discussing talk about, Mr. Bresk, say that the formation of our house is the first step when we will our conscience. It's like the most simple formation that we have. That is come from our parents, or maybe if we were educated by our grandparents or another member of our families. But then through the years when we are growing up, we have another kind of formation, or we will say information that is received by the schools, by another influenced people, even friends, and we will, of course, culture, society, and many fields, they will try to build ourselves, and especially our conscience. And then after these maybe first years of our life, we can start to build our discernment, because with this information that we receive in our house and then the formation that we receive in our life, we can start to say, okay, this is good and this is bad. But that's one thing that is very, very, very interesting for me is when we arrive at the moment of the decision, because we start to create this image of decision in our mind, trying to put in our action. And this is when moral can say, okay, you act in good way or bad way. And this image try to show that is the end of this cycle, of this spiral. But it's not, because imagine if you decide something, you make the action, and then you start to rethink in this thing, in this action. This author say that, okay, after this action comes the reflection. So it's like this image that you used when the people listen the word conscience. We have this angel and this evil in one of our shoulders. So one of these images start to say, hey, maybe you didn't do something good. So this reflection comes to our mind, and then even after this reflection, we can do a reconsideration. That means, okay, I did something wrong, maybe, or I want to work on that. And then after that, I can do a reform of action. That means try to solve what did you do wrong, right?
We always have that freedom to go back and redo something that in the moment, the decision that we made seemed to be the right one.
Mm-hmm.
But then in hindsight, after you have moved forward and you look back, it's like, oh, well, okay, so maybe I need to reconsider what I thought was the right decision at that moment. But now with the knowledge that I have gained and the experience of my life that kind of comes to reinforce this, I can now say, I'm going to revisit what I decided and redecide. Yes.
That sounds, very interesting, and I think it could be true in many cases. But I think we can also make the argument that when we look at the way society moves and given history, that I don't think that too many people stop and think about these sort of things and what repercussions our actions have. And, a lot of times people go with what they think they're doing that is right. A very clear example we could say, for example, would be St. Paul, right, who was killing Christians because he thought that was the right thing to do, and because he was loyal to the Roman Empire or whatever, and he was convinced that this was the right thing to do, and so he was following his moral conscience and saying this is what needs to be done for the right. And on the other hand, there were the Christians who were following their conscience at the same time and trying to do what they thought was right. So on both cases, I think from an objective perspective, we could say both of them were listening to the angel on their shoulder, and they were trying to do what they considered to be right. But then from their opposite perspective from each other, they thought that the other one, so Paul thought that the Christians were listening to the devil on their shoulder, and the Christians thought that Paul was listening to the devil. And so if we're trying to be objective, then we have to consider this idea of informing the conscience or helping people, especially as we speak as ministers to people, right? We're studying to be priests, and you serve in many roles as a minister to people in many ways, not only at school, when you're teaching students who are getting ready to be pastoral ministers, or also in spiritual direction, right? And so one of the things that we talk about, especially in today's political climate in the United States, where people seem to be so divided, and we talk about letting people choose which way to go. Let's talk about, for example, elections. We hear it often said that our job as ministers is to help people form their conscience so that they can make an informed decision, and not to tell them what to do, who to vote for. So how do you think, as ministers, we can help people form their conscience?
That is a really, really good question, because that is so key. And I want to say that conversion plays a role in that as well. Conversion, they're of a similar nature. But the forming of conscience has to do with how we see our relationship with God as humans and the dignity of life that is given to each of us. It's not just given to people with money. It's not just given to people with no money. But every human person has the dignity of the Creator as primary. So we want to use our building blocks to help form the conscience. What are the principles that underlie what it means to be human? And then what are the principles that underlie what does it mean to be, for us, Christians, and particularly Roman Catholics? So what are those values for which we would put our lives on the line? And I think that that's where the formation of conscience goes. It's like, these are the things that you would be willing to put your life on the line for.
Yeah, because I think if we look at, say, any church in the United States, chances are that it's a good mix of, on the one hand, people who are politically more conservative versus people who are also more liberal, right? And you see it not only politically speaking. You can talk about religion, even within Catholics. You see it that some people have very strong beliefs about certain things, and others think that this is more optional. Certain things. But I think at this point we can also continue the discussion talking about the idea of discernment. Once you have a conscience, and everything most of the things in our lives have to do with taking choices. From the minute we wake up to the time we go to bed, we're always making choices, and saying yes to something means saying no to a lot of things. And so how do we use our conscience and our intellect to make a right decision, where it doesn't really matter whether I'm going to wear a blue shirt or a black shirt today? Those are simple decisions, but then there are more important decisions that come that we can't take lightly. So this is, I think, the importance of giving people the tools to make the right decision, right? To do a proper discernment. And so what we mean by discernment is essentially making a judgment on something with enough information to be able to make the decision, right?
Yeah, it's going back to this point about information. We have now the concept of ignorance in our conscience. That the church and many authors say that we have to work on that. We are broken people, and it's normal that we ignore many things, and even when we think that we are doing good things. So the traditions say that we have to form our conscience with formation, and we can try to reduce our ignorance in order to form better our conscience. Because we come from many things in our background, especially the way how our parents take care of us, and many influence that we receive in our society. So we have to be very aware about that. And especially, like Antonio said, when we face big problems in our life, we cannot just say something very quickly and then avoid the consequence, because it's a big deal for us. That's why we understand, such a Christian, that we have to be very carefully when we make a decisions.
And to follow our conscience even when those in authority would have us do something else. It's like, okay, who do I obey? Do I obey the authority because they are put there for leadership and I owe loyalty to them? What if that leadership goes completely against something that I believe way down deep in my heart, and it's all a part of me? Where do I go? Do I rely on, well, I was following orders?
Yes.
Or do I say, well, I follow my conscience because this is how I follow God? So those are important decisions that we have to make.
Yes, and I think considering the idea of listening to authority, because we can talk about how, some people are very good about listening to authority, and there are a lot of people who also don't like authority. But when it comes to authority, we see, for example, in religious life, like the history of religious life, this idea of obedience, of listening to the people in authority, is central to us. And so in the past, especially before Vatican II, there was this sense of perfect obedience or blind obedience, that whatever they tell you to do, you do, right? And so fortunately for all of us, the church in her wisdom has said, well, maybe that's not completely right, because we've seen how many things have been done, and a lot of bad things and damage has been done through this idea of perfect obedience. But it's more of what is your conscience dictating that you do, and to have the proper tools to discern and say, I don't think that this is something that will be held good, right? Because at the end of the day, when we're talking about making a decision, especially in things that are important, it's not. It's essentially, how do I frame this? It's to say that we are trying to get closer to God, right? But that we believe in eternal life, and we believe that our actions today have consequences for the future. And at the end of the day, at least in the Christian tradition, we are trying to get closer to God, to have a deeper connection with God. And if we believe that our conscience is the place where we have part of this connection with God, then we would try to make our conscience be closer to Him, or form it in a way that is pleasing to Him, I guess.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yes, and for many years, people were thinking that the church was a party between God and us. Mm-hmm. Like, we have just to follow what the church says, and that's it. And it's a very difficult situation, because we believe that the church make all these rules, make all these decisions in the same line with God's will. But of course, we saw that in many cases, the church make mistakes not because they wanted to do, because maybe the situation and condition and maybe the information that they had at this time was very limited. Mm-hmm. That's why, again, the importance to form our conscience is very, very important. And something that I don't want to finish this podcast without saying is that we cannot silence our conscience, because it's a very, very big problem in us. The traditions say that the loss of the ability to perceive guilt is a grave spiritual illness. And I think this is something that we can see in many places. Many people prefer to keep on silence just in order to say the truth, or maybe in order to be like they are. So I think it's very controversial, this topic about conscience, and people, I'm sure, they will struggle, but with always a hope that there is something that God can give us in order to take good decisions.
Yeah, and I think we can also make a point to say that the grace of God is always present, right? Saint Alphonsus, who was a great moral theologian, one of the things that he would always emphasize was how available the grace of God is to everyone. That every human being, by nature of just by the fact that they're human, have, even if it's a little bit of grace. So it is our job as individual to grow this faith, to do something so that our grace, to the grace of God in us, continues to grow. And then it is also our job as ministers to help the grace of God in people continue to grow, so that again they can get closer to God. And at the end of the day, we're human. We're probably going to make mistakes, but as you mentioned earlier, we always have this idea of the different steps, right? That we have guilt sometimes that helps us think of, maybe I shouldn't have done that. And as you were saying earlier, Dr. Bunny, that we can always try and make amends for the things that we have done.
And to live a virtuous life, too. This is how we continue to stay on that path toward God, that we practice the virtues of patience and compassion and empathy and forgiveness. And we also have the sacramental structure of the church that helps us. Once we find ourselves off the path a little bit, we have the grace of the sacraments, the ability to receive God's forgiveness in reconciliation, the constant presence of Christ in the Eucharist. So we're not on this path by ourselves. It's not just up to me to make sure that I save my soul. Christ already saved my soul.
Yeah. Yes.
So I also wanted to say for discernment that something that I help people, because I get a lot of requests for this in spiritual direction. Usually people find themselves at a crossroads or at a decision point in their lives and trying to decide which way to go. It could be as serious as putting a parent in a nursing home, or it could be something like changing jobs, but it's a critical moment for a decision. So what I usually encourage them to do is to make lists of pros and cons. If you go in this direction, what are the good things that you see here, and what are the difficult or bad things that you see here? And if you go in this direction, what are the good things about this, and what are the bad things about that? And when you can see it in written form, your brain picks up, oh, well, there's a lot more pros on this side. So then it helps you to go in that direction. Sometimes when we're in critical moments, our brains, our hearts, and our guts are at war with each other, because my brain is telling me something, my heart is saying something else, and the gut is like, okay, I'm going to be the tiebreaker, but you're not listening to me. So when you see it written down, then you feel the pull toward the good. Yeah. And so that's something to consider in discernment moments.
Could you say something based on what you just, these steps that you gave us? Because sometimes there's also when you see the pros and cons side by side, but there's also the idea of what is the decision that I could live with, especially in things that are very important. And so where you may see more pros on one side, but then you may think that, I don't know if I could live with that, right? So would that also be like a good indicator or part of discernment, in a difficult decision?
Always bring it to prayer, because in prayer that time with God helps to enlighten. And the question, is this something I can live with, is an important one. And not just can I live with it, but can I have fullness of life here?
Oh, yes.
Because that's important, that Christ came to bring us fullness of life, not just the skills to survive,
yes,
but the ability to thrive.
You practically summarize the main idea of this document, Amoris Laetitia, when we have to value the smallest steps in our life, the very merciful way how God sees us, and especially that He wants that we act with our conscience. So thank you very much, Dr. Bonnie, for this beautiful insight. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for your knowledge. And I'm so glad that Antonio brought the image of his founder, San Ligorio, because all of our followers know that he is the main man about moral things. So I just want to close this moment asking all of our audience, how do they feel when they have to use their conscience, their discernment in these special tough moments, and especially with this knowledge that we share, and especially in this moment that we have to put ourselves in these conditions. So we were waiting for your answers, and we will wait for the next week in our next podcast, and of course we will have a new guest.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. It's been wonderful joining with you, and we'll see you the next time. We are your hosts. I am Antonio.
I'm Alexander.
Bye-bye.